This is CareShift with me, Southwick Biliconti, and today I'm excited to welcome Joe Cunningham, founding managing director and co-founder of Sante Ventures. Sante Ventures is a leading early-stage healthcare and life sciences venture capital firm focused on innovative biotechnology, medtech, and digitally enabled healthcare companies that address significant unmet medical needs and improve patient outcomes. Sante invests across biotech, medtech, and health tech with over $1 billion in capital under management and recently closed its largest fund to date, a $330 million Fund 5 in early 2026. Sante's portfolio includes category-defining companies backed from pre-seed and seed through growth stages such as Farapulse, which was acquired by Boston Scientific, Explories, acquired by IBM, and AbVitro, which was acquired by Bristol Myers Squibb. Joe is such an amazing mentor of mine, and this was such a great show to do and such a privilege. Joe, it's amazing to have you on the show, so thank you for your time today.
Absolutely. Good to be here.
Yeah, so, you know, I want to kind of start off right now that Sante just raised, I guess, around a $330 million Fund 5, correct me if I'm wrong, in early of 2026. What it looks like it was oversubscribed. What changed in the LP conversation this time versus the beginning of when you first started Sante? And what has gained their confidence?
Yeah, so it's a difficult fundraising environment, no doubt, and that it's all driven by exits, driven by outcomes. Fortunately, we've been at this now for over 20 years in good markets and bad markets, and we've consistently delivered results. And so you raise money on your track record.
Yeah. And with that, was it, you guys are at, a billion, around a billion under management now. Has the firm's strategy kind of evolved since when you guys started around 2006? Because I know previously when we spoke, you mentioned how, one of the biggest criteria you were doing with Sante at the beginning was obviously giving returns to LPs, but now you're kind of investing more on things that interest you per se. What does that look like now? Did that change the firm's strategy as well?
It has not. No, we've had a consistent strategy throughout our time. The one thing that we changed since the first fund was moving more into biotechnology. At the time that we started, biotech was sort of an out of favor sector, and we didn't have all the contacts and networks that you needed to do that. Over the years, we've grown into that. And so now we do biotechnology, we do medical devices, and we do healthcare services or health tech. And we do them. We don't have any quotas or criteria of doing one third, one third, one third, but it kind of works out that way. We've built our team substantially since then, and so we have a lot of really smart, good young folks that specialize in those different areas. The founding partners, my two partners and I, was sort of do it across the board, but we have a lot of specialists within the group as well.
Right, right. And when it comes to kind of that biotechnology, what do you see in that horizon right now, and why is this the perfect time to start looking a lot more into physical AI and that biotechnology space?
Yeah, so I'd say in biotechnology, there have just been some really great breakthroughs in the science that have unleashed a whole new era of personalized medicine, of drug development that is just being amazingly effective.
Yeah, and when it comes to kind of AI and that capability, have you seen so far with any products how the capability of AI is mixing well with biotech and how that
Yes.
kind of work?
Yeah.
Yeah,
So the AI, of course, is touching every aspect of care.
right.
We're using AI tools to help us, particularly in the preclinical phase of drug development, to select targets, to create digital twins that help with some of the early preclinical work to shorten the time frame and lower the cost. Traditionally it takes 10 to 15 years and hundreds of millions of dollars to develop a new drug, and you still have binary risk years down the road, and that makes that a tough area to invest in. But these advancements are helping shorten that time period, lower the cost some. And that's really important for drug development, because back in the days when you were, doing something like a statin that could affect billions of people, well, the cost per unit could be a lot lower. With personalized medicine, often you're developing drugs that have a much more targeted and therefore a much smaller population And so the cost per unit can be really high. So we really have to find ways to develop those drugs in a more economic fashion.
Yeah, what has changed and what I guess has been the complete ROI for these kind of drug assessment kind of products that you're talking about now versus before? And what has been the biggest selling point for them when selling to these pharma or to these clinical trial sites? What has, as you've seen, the biggest bit ROI been for them?
So I'd say it's hard to generalize on that. You have to look at each specific project to stand on its own. Sometimes it's because the clinical need is so large that there may not be many patients, but if you're successful in developing the product, all the patients that do need it, you've got a product that is better than everybody else, best in class. Sometimes it's you found a way to repurpose a drug or to have something about that project where it's not going to take as long or as much. Across all the sectors, whether it's health tech, biotech, or medical device, we are always looking for a transformational change. One thing about the venture business, it's the hits business. You have a lot of failures. The ones that do succeed, they need to succeed massively. You need to be addressing really large pain points. And so that's what we're always looking for in anything that we do is that it's addressing an unmet need for which mankind just needs that solution. You don't want to develop something where you have to go out and explain to people that they have a problem and then try to convince them that you have a solution for this problem they didn't know they had. That doesn't work well.
What are those biggest kind of market needs that you're kind of excited about right now, whether that be in biotech or health tech, and what does that kind of look like?
So for biotechnology, I'd say one of the big advances that we have been seeing is the discovery of what's called the total body inflammatory load, the effect that inflammation has as a precursor for cancer or heart disease or autoimmune disease or whatever. We know that our body's chronic conditions are driven by inflammatory products. And we now know that diet can play a big role on that, producing healthier foods. But we've also had breakthroughs with the ways to regulate that inflammation, moving down to the individual biochemical pathways that drive that inflammatory process. And so we produce things that are active on those different known pathways. For medical devices, you've seen the increasing change from invasive procedures to minimally invasive procedures to robotic procedures, all things designed to lessen the wear and tear on the body of having the procedure done and getting better outcomes, so that rather than having to have open procedures, you can have minimally invasive procedures. And of course, health tech is now driven by artificial intelligence. We have severe shortage of physicians, not only in this country, but worldwide. The aging baby boomers are developing a much higher chronic diseases because of aging. Aging doctors are retiring or dying at a faster rate than we're training new doctors. The birth rate of the younger generations is way lower than it has been, and so you have an elder care population with a smaller workforce to take care of those people. You've got to use technology to address that. I use the analogy, this philosopher mathematician Malthus back in the 1780s famously predicted that by the 1940s, the population of the world would have reached 2 billion people. We couldn't grow more food than that, so there'd be massive starvation and famine. And that didn't happen, but it's not that he got the math wrong. He just didn't take into account technology allowing us to be more efficient and effective at growing food. You're seeing the same thing in healthcare now. We can't continue to deliver care the way that we have. We just don't have enough people to do that. But we have technologies that we are developing that make that process more effective and more efficient. And anybody that's dealt with the American healthcare system knows that it needs more effectiveness and efficiency, but the same problems are occurring all around the world. It's not just the United States.
Right. And, with artificial intelligence, it comes with a lot of risk. And in today's market, we know like if you have a product that's like 95% compliant or 95% effective, that might not be 100% well in the clinical sense because that 5% could potentially make something wrong. What does that look like in today's market? And are physicians and clinical practitioners, wary of this risk? And are they looking for AI products that will navigate this risk, or are they okay with kind of testing out products that have some type of maybe 2-3% failure rate, but they're okay with that.
Well, you got to start with the fact that people are using AI, whether doctors are involved or not. People at home are going to Chat GPT or whichever one they prefer to get medical information. And it's got a lot of good information. It's really good at it. But as you say, there's a percentage of time where it's bad at it. And when it is bad, it can be really bad. So you need to have guardrails on the technology. We're developing products that use the LLMs, but that put guardrails on them. We still have a doctor in the loop. We always put a doctor in the loop to provide that guardrail. And I think that's important. The AI is improving all the time. Will it evolve to a point where you don't need that? Maybe. But for the foreseeable future, I think that these are tools that can make you more effective, make you more efficient, but that still need that human touch.
I mean, primary care has become much more accessible now, where you don't even have to go to the clinic to get a prescription. You can just book a meeting online. We see it with Doctronic. We see it with like Lotus Health with these companies where you can just pay 30-40 bucks, see a physician, potentially get a prescription, and you're done for your day and you can go and you don't even have to see a primary care doctor. Is that kind of how we're transitioning in, the coming years where everything will be online and whenever you have a big health concern where you need to see a specialty clinic, that's when you go in person? Is that kind of like the transition of what you're seeing with these products as well as these clinics kind of overall? Is that a good transition kind of to make out where it's going to be super easily accessible for us consumers, or is it going to be the other way where consumers, the first time you get injured or whatever, you're not going to go and online. The first person you're going to call is your primary care physician or your specialty doc. And the argument of these products that are making primary care more accessible online is not really that useful for the everyday public. What's your thoughts on that?
So I think that the online telemedicine kinds of things can play a role in some things where you just need to have that conversation with somebody and it can be handled. But that doesn't replace all of the role of a primary care physician. I think people still need good primary care that involves a relationship with a trusted doctor who not only can provide the primary care services and talk, but can do physical exam, make diagnosis, can be an advocate and guide, navigator for people through the complicated healthcare system. Healthcare is only getting more complex and more complicated. You move to a new city in the United States and you call up to get a primary care doctor and you still have to wait months to get that appointment. You may see them very brief periods of time because they're just so busy, they don't have enough time. And so I think the technology can help free them up to spend more time doing the things that aren't as easily done without a personal relationship and can be affected that way. The other thing is that specialty care is becoming much more fragmented because there's so much new knowledge. The doctors are tending to specialize more and more and more, even within, urology or orthopedics or ophthalmology, cardiology. There's many different divisions of specialty. And so when you want to get in to see a specialist physician, it's not easy to know which doctor actually addresses the particular problem that you have. A good primary care doctor knows that. I still think that we have to fight to continue the doctor-doctor relationships. As primary care doctors spend less time in the hospital, they may actually know the specialist that they're referring to way less than they used to. And I think we need to try to counter that because those personal relationships that allow you to know which doctors are going to be the best
Right.
referral source is still an important part of primary care.
Yeah, and is that, argument, of, primary care kind of, I guess, getting replaced where, as you mentioned, more users are using ChatGPT and stuff like that, where, the concept of, I recently had this VC, his name is Amit Garg on the show. He's a partner at Tau Ventures, and he mentioned how America is focuses a lot on sick care, not on preventative care. Hear your thoughts on that. Do you agree we're kind of still in the transition of patients are only coming to the clinic for sickness and then and all of that, or can we make the leap into preventative health? And what are you seeing that as well in being yourself in the forefront of technology?
Absolutely. So the fields of functional medicine or longevity, preventive medicine have also completely uh, erupted into a massive amount of new information. Doctors in training are not getting enough of that kind of training right now. The system of medical education is very, very slow to change and adapt. So doctors are having to learn that from other sources, but it's super important. I think the advent of an understanding of how much our diet affects our health, how much our microbiome affects our health, are things that we now know are at the forefront of how we keep ourselves healthy. That wasn't known 25 years ago. And so we've got to find ways to make that information available to the caregivers and to make that information available to the patients. And so we're seeing that more and more. And it's the only way that we can reduce this huge chronic disease burden that we're now seeing the baby boomers grow into.
Yeah, and that specific chronic disease kind of management that's currently going on, is that a product of a lot of times the people aren't taking that proactive care, or is it mostly that the healthcare system is not justifying what they should be doing perfectly, like, kind of helping them as much as possible, where we have the concept where we don't have to go to the doctor once a year for our primary, or we don't have to go to a dentist every year, like these common examples where we see, and we don't really, obviously we can't force anybody to do that, but like what, how do we kind of make, I guess, offer education to these consumers to kind of be more proactive and do that overall? And is there any way technology can help in that? And are you seeing that?
Well, I think you can kind of draw a parallel to a larger issue that we have right now, and that's that it's difficult to find reliable, accurate sources of information, whether that's news or whether it's healthcare advice. There's a lot of misinformation that's out there. One thing that's really held back the longevity, wellness, functional medicine point is that because many of the products are not regulated by the FDA, it opens it up to charlatans who want to use that, so they sell unproven products that don't have any science behind them, and they advertise them heavily. And it's difficult for people to differentiate between those that are just complete snake oil from those that actually do have a scientific basis and can be very helpful. So we've got to work on that. In addition to that, we need to develop trusted sources of information that people know they can go to and get accurate information. You take an LLM like Open Evidence, it's very, very good and very accurate at providing good information, but it's not consumer facing. It's written more for physicians. And the other LLMs can provide really, really good information, but as we've talked about, sometimes they are completely wrong. And so I think you will see developed over the next few years an improvement in the consumer facing sources of information. And then it's just a matter of being sure that those are made available and that people can understand, okay, have some regulation to them and these others don't. I do think there's a role for regulation of AI for that reason.
Yeah, and does that come to, because we see this a lot, like we mentioned Doctronic, where you can technically chat to an AI bot and you can get quote unquote, um, I don't know, quote unquote, according to them, good data on health, health information from on clinical information, and whether it's coming from a background like OpenAI or Claude, I'm not too sure, or if they're training their own models. Does it come down to having a strong data moat when it comes to kind of making those tools for consumers? Or, like, what is it going to take for an accurate or somewhat accurate kind of AI, like an open evidence for a consumer kind of overlay? Like,
Well, the products that we are developing, we use the LLMs, no question about it.
yeah.
But we also put guardrails on there. We have a doctor in the loop and that's reviewing what's being said, find and correct mistakes. So I think right now you need to have that. You don't need to have autonomous AI giving information that doesn't have any kind of regulation, even though studies have been shown that if you're just looking at percentage right, AI does better than a doctor plus AI, better than a doctor alone. But the misses are much more dangerous on the one. So they may be right 98% of the time, but the 2% of the time it's dangerous. And so having that doctor in the loop lowers the chance of something really bad happening from the AI. And so I think that's where we are right now. This technology is evolving so rapidly that who knows how that will change. When Steve Jobs walked across the stage in 2001 and held up the first iPhone, there wasn't anybody in the audience that said, well, that's curtains for the taxi business. The unintended consequences of these technologies we'll just have to see as they develop.
Yeah, and with that point, kind of going to the opposite side of the physician, how can the physician be more proactive? Because now we're seeing more clinicians are obviously realizing that their patients are using AI on a daily basis and obviously coming to their clinics thinking they know more potentially than the doctor because of ChatGPT said this thing versus their doctor might be saying something else. How could doctors be more prepared and be more proactive to kind of talk or kind of be gauging all of these kind of technology uses by the consumer and kind of be, I guess, on the patient side, since obviously they can't really stop them from using these tools, and kind of also talk about where they still are the clinical expertise in their room and they're the ones who went to medical school. Like how can that kind of discussion be brought up and kind of help the consumer?
Well, I think it goes back to building a relationship with your patients. If you develop a trusted relationship and they feel like they're talking to somebody that has their best interest at heart, and it doesn't need to be antagonistic if they're using AI. Of course, they're using AI. We all use AI now. So you just have a thoughtful conversation with them. You point out the things that it says that may not be in their best interest. It's just done by conversation. The two things that where technology can really help with that, one is we now do team-based approaches to care. So the primary care doctor doesn't have to be the only one having those conversations. And then technology such as ambient listening and charting free up time so that the time that the doctor does spend with the patient can be concentrating on actually delivering care rather than doing administrative functions.
Right. And with that, going to the administrative functions here, we see a lot of products that are in healthcare specifically where they're building automating the whole back office or the front office for the clinics when it comes to, the RCM or the claim eligibility or, the agents taking care of the patient referrals or the patient scheduling, all of the information from the front end to the back end. Do you think there's still room for vertical AI in healthcare, or is it more specifically, the products that kind of take over the whole, atmosphere of from the front end of the healthcare staff to the back end will be the true winners that are kind of overspread on the horizontal side, or is there still room for being, the number one oncology referral tool or the number one nephrology back end for the what does it look like? Do you have to be horizontal to win, or can you still be in your lane and kind of take over?
Yeah, no, I think it's both. I see, and we're actually developing products, and others are as well. It starts with a conversational AI where you call up your healthcare provider and you start with the conversational AI that's for engagement and navigation and triage and referral management, the entire spectrum of doing that, and where you pull in humans in the loop as they're needed. I always say you have to build a village behind the AI. You just have a bot that doesn't have any connection to the healthcare system, or its
Right, right.
effectiveness is not that good. But if you've built the village behind that, where the bot is guiding you through what you need, but there's a village behind it for it to guide you to, I think that works very effectively. Another big area that AI is transforming is the concept of them being predictive machines, prediction machines. There's a book out of the Harvard Press that from 10 years ago that talked about the power that AI has for doing that. And so, for instance, if you get a chest x-ray or a mammogram or a CT, and you may not have cancer now, but through the predictive ability to examine the pixels and at a depth that the human eye can't see, you can say you don't have cancer right now, but you're at high risk of developing cancer 5 years from now. And now there's things that you can do to actually keep from developing that cancer or that heart disease. I think that's going to be a massive wave that we're going to see over the next decade.
Right, right. And is that kind of going to, I guess, kind of be a great kind of sign for a lot of founders kind of building in that space? Is when you're kind of sourcing these founders, is there any kind of non-obvious signals that you're looking for that makes you move fast in a deal? Kind of saying, okay, let's kind of move on and kind of learn more about this company or kind of potentially look into investing with them, whether that be as a lead or kind of coming in with other investors? Like, what is your kind of take on?
So we do very early stage investing, and I'll kind of draw the circle around that. We do company formation even. So we work with a lot of the academic medical centers. In fact, we have a lot of the big health systems as LPs in our fund, and so they call us very early. So company formation is fine. You've got to build a team. If a team comes and they're built, that's great. We take large ownerships of the companies that we do invest in, and we put lots of work into that. You need several things to be a successful company. First, you need to be addressing a big problem. There's plenty of room for people to make incremental, smaller inventions and move the football down the field, as it will, but those don't particularly fit venture well. Venture is more about transformational big projects. You then need a source of continuous innovation. You never start out having invented the whole thing. So we're looking for that, a source of innovation. You need an entrepreneur. You need science, technology, and then you need a source of capital, which we provide. But you have to have all those functions. They don't have to all be residing in one person, but you need to have all those functions. So it may be that the scientist doctor source of innovation is continuing to be an academic researcher that's involved. It may be that the entrepreneur is the CEO. It may be that you've got an entrepreneur, but then you need to fill in some weak spots with more administrative CEO or CFO. So it's a team-based approach just to be sure that you have all those different pieces.
Right. And there's a lot of researchers and a lot of clinicians that have these novel ideas. They just don't know how to start. Where you guys kind of find these kind of companies that are, or these people even where they're, at the stage of I have an idea, but I don't know where to go, where to start, and they can potentially come to Sante. How can they hear about you? Is it from their medical institution or is it from an outside source? How does that kind of play into effect?
Yeah, so it's from everywhere. I mean, we see well over 1,000 opportunities a year. Many of them are because of our relationships with the health systems, academic centers, and so we get them through the health systems. Sometimes they come in over the transom. We do lots of talks. We're on lots of boards and organizations, so they kind of come from everywhere. And then we have developed different tools. So we've got a Sante Excel that's sort of an incubator where we can guide them along in early stages. And then there are plenty of other incubators and accelerators around that we work with. So it's sort of all of the above.
Right. And are there any modes that you're currently focusing on in biotech and health tech or even in medtech in general when it comes to like overall data modes or distribution as a mode or clinical mode? There's many different modes out there. What are you looking at in the AI world specifically when it comes to what differentiates one company versus the other?
So I would say I'm always looking for something that's really hard, really difficult, because that's a good moat. You know, people will come and they'll have a medical device and they'll say, "Oh, it's a 510K. You don't even have to, or you don't even have to go through the FDA." Well, I have no interest in that. I want it to be a really hairy regulatory thing to do because that's a moat. That's a differentiator. So I much rather have PMA or IND than not. So regulation is one. On AI, this concept of building the village, that's not easy to do. I like companies where they're developing data that's not easy to replicate. And so the more customers they have, the longer they're at it, their data becomes more and more differentiated. And we do a lot of that where the data is increasingly valuable and it's not easily accessible.
Yeah, and is that kind of go into, obviously the data not being accessible? How can like an early stage founder, as you mentioned, kind of steal partnerships or kind of get into databases to train maybe whether that be their AI or, for their company in general with private, these health systems. Open Evidence is a great example where they've unleashed amazing partnerships where other companies can't even replicate. OpenAI won't even be able to replicate this kind of stuff because of their amazing partnerships. How can early stage companies do that? Is that just through grinding and hustling to get these institutions to recognize them and take a chance on them as a pilot to partner with them, collect data, or like is it just, for example, coming to Sante and just saying, "Hey, we can help you with your company and provide these great intros to these health systems." Like, how can early stage companies navigate that whole, I guess.
There's no question that we leverage our relationships with the big health systems, and the systems have had so much consolidation that we can put 3 or 4 large systems together on a project that and you're kind of coming out of the gate as a pretty big company if you've got a 3 or 4 some odd billion-dollar health systems coming together to work on it. So we do a lot of that. Networking is still a really important part of entrepreneurship and innovation. And so we have those networks. We've been at it a long time and we use those. Entrepreneurs come from industry with their own networks and that they're useful also. So it takes a village.
Yeah, for sure. It definitely takes a village. And, what specific spaces kind of moving into kind of the specific specialties here? Like what specific, I guess, specialties, whether that be oncology, which is pretty much a blowing market right now with, different types of cancer and genetics and things like that, or, in, brain health or in gut. Like what specifically in specialty wise are you very kind of excited to see right now? Is it everything, or is there anything specifically in a specialty that you're kind of looking at right now?
Yeah, so the brain health is certainly an up and coming thing. What we're finding is the common pathways between heart disease and cancer and brain health and other chronic diseases, they go back to these inflammatory pathways. And so we get very specific on which pathways that we're targeting. And there's exciting improvements going on. The uh, T regulatory cells, Tregs that won the Nobel Prize last year, are a whole new area of treating inflammation that's finding exciting breakthroughs. The whole cell mediated therapy, it's been difficult to scale, and so it's stayed out of favor. But we're finding ways to scale that to get better at doing that, and I think that's an exciting area as well. And then back to the prediction. So we have a company that is out of Mass General that uses AI to read mammograms and dramatically change the information that you can get from just the standard mammogram, not only to be way more accurate, but to be predictive. And we started that where, it started out with Science and Nature papers, moved to the New England Journal and clinical journals. We took it through the FDA, got FDA approval. So it was a long, heavily scientific and regulated pathway to get it out there. You develop a moat and you develop something really special when you go down that path.
Right. I recently had the chief information officer of Rad AI, which is a company that's kind of transforming, automating a lot of the quote unquote boring tasks for radiology and kind of helping them with interpreting scans and stuff like that in a more nuanced level. What is, and he kind of mentioned, that a lot of the times, the space is getting really, crowded. There's a lot of different companies that are here kind of saying we can interpret a lot of radiology scans, ultrasound or MRI, but, kind of being very, I guess, as you mentioned, trusted with the clinics and being there for them since day one without even having a product is kind of something that's really kind of a driving factor, for a lot of companies versus the ones that are coming in and just randomly putting in AI and making random products out there. But the ones that have the trust and the capability are kind of outweighing right now in, I guess, in today's world. Is that something that you're also seeing where the trust is the biggest outlier? And if there's two companies, the one that has that driven relationship will be the ultimate winner?
I absolutely believe so. That a lot of people from the tech sector think that healthcare is just another vertical of tech, and I don't believe that. I think that you have to to do a healthcare company using AI rather than using AI to be a healthcare company. So we still want clinical trials, randomized control trials. We won't see outcomes. I think you have to do that.
Yeah, and, is there a specific kind of, like, for example, a lot of companies, especially in health tech, their end goal is to kind of like to work with payers. They want to make that kind of biggest kind of cash cows from there. Have you seen maybe specific companies in your portfolio working with payers? How did they kind of get those contracts started, and what did they have to prove ROI for them? And do they have to kind of show a different ROI to commercial payers versus the Medicare, Medicaid, and stuff?
Yeah, so I would say this. First, yes, we work with payers a lot, just as we work with providers a lot. And one learning that you have with either one of them is that they are large bureaucracies. The sales cycles are long. And what that means is that you need to be doing something really big for them. If I run into companies all the time that think they're selling to hospitals or selling to payers and their contract size is, $50,000. That's not going to work. You can't spend 18 months, 2 years on a sales cycle and have something that small point solution. So those don't work. But there is a big transformative change that I think that we will see. Right now, if you look out in the market, there's a lot of AI tools that are sold to providers, to health systems to optimize their billing, to optimize their coding and charting. And then the payers have those same kind of tools. So it's like this war going on of AI tools to battle each other. And I don't think that's where the future is. I think that the future is to use AI interfaces where the provider has their bot, the payer has their bot. Those bots meet each other. They build a trusted relationship. So the provider bot can go into the medical record and know all the information. The payer bot and provider bot both read all of the literature and then they negotiate. They know what the contract says. They know what the patient says. They have all of the information and they can get to the common truth without a bunch payer of middlemen getting involved in that. And that's all back to a trusted relationship. But that we're seeing that happen. We're working on some projects that are doing that with both payers and providers. And I do think that's where it's headed. It's actually going to be the thing that I think will finally drive value-based reimbursement rather than just fee-for-service reimbursement.
Yeah, kind of you mentioned that, and I think that's a great segue. Do you think, a lot of, early stage founders, they kind of focus on finding maybe ACOs or other organizations that are very, very value-based care incentivized to kind of help, kind of show that their product is, you know, quote unquote, as valuable as possible. Do you think that's the next wave, is kind of focusing solely on, value-based care incentives? And what do you think that future looks like for that? And do you think the concept of fee for service is kind of going to be kind of not that big anymore? Or
So fee for service has been hard to kill, and I think that I'm not a big believer in pilots. I think you can get death by pilots because it tends to drive you into more point solutions. I think that this building these trusted symbiotic relationships between the providers and the payers to get to this common truth is a much better way to do that. And where a lot of that is driving it, a lot of health systems, they have both the provider and they've got their own health plan. And so that's a good place for them to begin to develop that and then take that out. Is United Healthcare a provider or a payer now? It's both. It's the largest primary care group in the country. Lots of health systems have their own health plan. That's where a lot of the activity is going.
yeah, and how do you think about category creation? Do you think there's going to be a big quote unquote kingmaker in healthcare where there's going to be one kind of company and, in a specific sector, and maybe in biotech, and that's going to be, and versus other specific players as well? I mean, a classic example is in the cloud space with Microsoft, Google, and AWS. Or is that something that's going to be completely different in biotech and healthcare, where it's going to be there's just going to be one player and everyone else is going to be downgraded, and, one major player and everyone else maybe has like a 25% market share and something like that? Or is it going to be like AWS, Google Cloud, and things like that?
Well, so with the LLMs, they take so much money and so much time that I think you will have some consolidation, and there will be a relative few, but we've seen that happen over and over again, whether it was with the original search engines. So, nobody knew Google was going to win big at the time with electronic medical records. When I started looking at EMRs back in the late 90s, there were tons of them. And I had no ability to know that Epic was going to sort of win the entire war for Epic and Cerna. But so there will be winners and losers like that. But if you do the study of taking the top 100 businesses in the world, and then you go 10 years, it's a different list. And you go 10 years, and it's a completely different list. So companies will ebb and flow as always. I do think one differentiator in healthcare is taking on clinical decision support. Companies like Epic, they all the time are having new products. And anytime I'm looking at an AI company for healthcare, I want to have an Epic strategy, because if you can't differentiate yourself from an Epic or an ambient listing, there's a few winners. If you don't have some way to differentiate yourself, you're not going to be successful. Epic does not like to get into clinical decision support, clinical decision making. And I think that can be a differentiator when you can build in that. I go back to it takes a village. If you build that village, Epic's never going to build that village behind you.
Yeah, yeah, and and this kind of is reminds me of, we recently just saw. I mean, it happened like a while back, but we saw it was very recent where we got full electronic health records, where now it's fully electronic versus paper, and that shift happened rapidly, and it kind of reminds me of how AI is now, where that change is happening rapidly in healthcare. Is that going to keep on happening where, we see a shift in kind of tech or in much more of an EC capability, and it's going to be a rapid change, specifically in healthcare, or is it going to be changing over time where things are going to be slower? Because at first AI kind of, taking in AI was relatively slow a year or so ago. Now it's relatively faster. Is that going to keep on happening with different tech waves? And, you know, how is that going to look?
Yeah, so I think it's in some ways it's generational. So the sort of digital native younger folks that are going into healthcare are patients. They embrace AI completely, and so I think that age group, as they go through their careers, will be way more embracing. On the other hand, and I started my career practicing medicine for many years. I've spent thousands of hours in emergency rooms taking care of patients, and clinic taking care of patients. And I don't watch doctor shows because of that, because I've had enough of that. But I have watched The Pit, which is a very popular show these days, and I am struck by the fact that those human interactions that are portrayed in that show take place all over the world every day, with patients that are in need, having somebody that is their advocate, that's giving them trusted good advice, that are doing really complicated things that are for that patient's best interest, all with empathy and heart. And I think that's going to continue to be an integral part of healthcare.
Well, as you mentioned, you were a practicing clinician. What got you more into the venture capital business overall? Can you explain that story? How that happened?
So I went back to near my where I grew up and practiced medicine. So I was a country doctor, as you will. I'm an internal medicine doctor, and that was at a time when emergency medicine was not a separate specialty. So internists did a lot of emergency rooms. So I certainly did that as well, and I enjoyed doing it. I did it for 14, 15 years, and enjoyed doing it. But I'm not a do one thing kind of person. I've always liked to do different things, and so I went back and got an MBA and became a health system administrator, a chief medical officer for a large health system. And I did that for over a decade. And I felt like I learned a lot of things at more scale than you would ever learn as a physician. So I enjoyed doing that. And at that system, we started a corporate venture fund, really to try to bring innovation into these large bureaucratic systems. And that's how I got into venture. And the CEO and I actually left that system together to form Sante. We joined a venture capital firm, Austin Ventures. And then after a few years, went out and joined Sante. He's still my partner today, along with one of the AV partners. And so it evolved. It was really just following my interest and following what I thought would have impact.
Yeah. With that, do you think, when you were practicing as a clinician, now it's still pretty bad. As a clinician, you're obviously constantly burned out. Patients are not getting, adequate, instant time to see a provider. Is it still the same as when you were practicing versus as a practicing physician now? Obviously, it's going to be a little bit different, but, in terms of the burnout, in terms of providers working, how has that transitioned over time now?
So I think burnout is something you work against. We now have AI tools and that can take some of the tedious task away and actually help. So I've got a son in medical school who's going through that training now, and the advice I give him is right. If you need to enjoy the human interaction, you need to enjoy the human relationships that you develop. You need to keep that sense of doing worthwhile work that's making the world a better place and let that drive you. And that's the way it's always been, and I think it will continue to be that way.
Yeah, yeah. Kind of going into how these medical kind of groups can execs can evaluate AI tools. What is the best kind of proactive way they can be evaluating which tools can kind of help their clinic? And it obviously just depends on what the product is per product, what they're doing. But is there I guess an overall generalized sense of how these clinics or these not these clinics, but these large hospital enterprises should be evaluating tools and things like that right now?
So I think that the thing that you don't want to do is have it make uh, interactions less personal. We all uh, I'm sure you're gone calling the big pharmacy chains and talking to their answering machine, and you can't get to talk to a real live person, and yet it doesn't solve your problem. It misunderstands what you're saying, and that's the awful way for that to happen. Better AI, better conversational AI, it takes away some of that uh, irritation, but you always need to be able for that to escalate you to talking to a real life person so that you can solve for all the 2 and 3 standard deviation variations that the system isn't working.
Right, right. And in that case, one of the big things that a lot of early stage companies do is they find a champion that can help them kind of getting them into the foot in the door of, specific clinics, specific hospital enterprises, whatever, to kind of tell them these enterprises, hey, this is an amazing tool that you guys should be looking at or something like that. And kind of build trust and over time. And I feel like kind of finding that champion has become early harder than ever because, a lot of people are, not really kind of trying to talk to a lot of AI because there's so much competition now. A lot of people are approaching these people as much as possible to kind of say, "Hey, use my tool. Tell me what you think about it." How do you kind of instruct these early stage companies to like find these early key champions? And I know it's pretty difficult.
So most of the big systems have chief digital officers that are doctors that are overseeing that, and there is a tension in the marketplace right now because uh, so many startups are point solutions, and it's very difficult for a point solution to rise up out of the crowd and to get implemented in a meaningful way in the large systems. At the same time, a lot of the big players don't get down uh, at that human level, so they those two things, point solutions versus large systems, have to find a meeting place. And I think that's taking place largely at health system levels. Individual doctor groups, it's hard for them to have the resources and bring in what's needed to bring in to develop these tools. So most of it, the innovation is taking place at health system levels. But even with that, it's about incorporating, pulling different point solutions in to make a system, and that system has got to have that village behind it. So that's the hard work of doing this: is using the AI not as a be all end result, but as part of a system that has village connected to it.
It's all about having the village. It's
It
all
is.
It really is. 2 years from now, though, how does Sante's portfolio look like, and how is that going to be different from where it is now?
So I would say that we're building those villages. We're pulling our different technologies together into systems. We're working a lot with health systems and with payers. And so I think that the change over the 2 years is just going to be more evolution of that work. It's not that we're going to change and do something completely different. We're going to continue to do that. I do think finding ways for to use AI as prediction machines to predict disease, to predict treatment outcomes, the whole concept of digital twins, where you create a digital version of the patient and then you can see which interventions are more likely to work for that particular patient. That's exciting work that's going on at a lot of the academic centers. And I think that's an area that's really going to show benefit over the next few years.
Yeah, I'm curious though because I see a lot of clinical trial kind of companies that are these early stage companies that going to your digital twin statement where they kind of mock a lot of the data, patient data. It's fake data, but it's kind of showing as a real person, as you mentioned. And this is something that is, I guess, heavily debated right now. Where is this something that's viable? Obviously, it won't lead to an FDA kind of clearance where you showed, perfect kind of, management for these fake patients. Obviously, you need to use real patients, but is it something good to use these digital patients that are mocking real patients as data points, whether that be for a disease symptom, whatever that specific company is tracking? Is that something a good starting point to kind of see where their product is, getting the data from that kind of digital kind of twins, or should they go straight into kind of recruiting for patients and speaking to actual patients?
So I think that it's going to be very useful to do that to shorten and lessen the cost of developing
Yeah,
treatments and of predicting which treatments work. So I think it is a good thing. Right now, largely still at the academic research level. And like anything else, the way that you do that is not by replacing clinical trials with it, but by augmenting them and doing that with randomized controlled studies where you demonstrate the outcome. You can't do it all with the computer. You have to do it with science.
right, right. Yeah. So now, Joe, are you ready for a rapid fire to
Sure.
kind of, yeah. So kind of going into your portfolio quickly, how has your portfolio companies changed with AI over time? The ones that you've invested in way before AI, now with the AI world, how have they adapted?
So they've adopted by now, then we don't view AI as a tool of itself. We use it as something that's incorporated into whatever pain point we're trying to address. So it's a tool in the toolbox. It's not the tool, it's a tool in the toolbox.
Yeah. And how have your portfolio companies, is if there's any that have been liquidity that you've gotten liquidity from, what have they been doing after when they've maybe sold their business or they went public? What is the common trend for current founders right now after?
So something that we've always tried to do is find a big pain point, develop an intervention for that pain point, and do that where the unmet clinical need is so great that when you find something that's working, the big companies, the strategics will buy you early because from an economic standpoint, it's much better if they go ahead and buy you before you've had to spend the hundreds of millions of dollars to get all the way through the FDA. They have a much cheaper cost of capital, and so you'd like to use that capital. And so we've done that a lot. We've been very successful with that. But one thing that we have found is that the big strategic has then bought a product that has not been completely iterated. What I've learned is that big companies are not good at iteration. And so rather than looking for the full-on buyout that we've done in the past, we're finding that it's in both parties' best interest to do more of a structured buyout where we can continue to have that entrepreneurial team building and iterating on that product for a longer period of time because innovation is just done better by smaller, more nimble outfits. By the time you get to be a giant uh, multinational company, every conversation they have has to go through the legal department, and it just that nothing happens. And so
Terrible.
that's the change that I think we've learned.
Yeah, and with AI technological shift, what if you had to predict or kind of go into another technological shift, what would that be? I know I've gotten like nuclear energy as a good concept in healthcare as a being could potentially come in. What do you think is a great kind of next technological shift that could potentially come in?
I think healthy food production. I think
I like
the
that. Yeah.
yeah. I think sustainable farming methods and creating a healthier lifestyle, a healthier diet needs to become a much more integral part of healthcare delivery, functional medicine, longevity. I think that is a tidal wave that we should embrace and move forward.
Final question here, Joe. How has being in the venture business kind of helped if there's anything in your personal life, if there was anything when it comes to venture as a whole, and how has that kind of shaped your family life? If there's any lessons, learnings from there to your family and personal life.
Yeah, so I've got three sons who are now all in their early 20s and pursuing their careers, and it's allowed me hopefully to impart some wisdom to them about innovation and living a life of innovation and creativity. My wife's a physician, and she's gotten deeply involved in the functional medicine longevity field just because she's interested in it, and so we've tried to incorporate that into our life and lifestyle as well.
Yeah, well, Joe, it's amazing to have you on the show and I enjoyed this so much. This was super fun. It was a pure joy. So thank you so much for being here. I truly appreciated it.
Good to talk with you. Thanks.